Welcome back, everyone, to the second of four special spotlights we have for today. And this one is fighting cybercrime in the UK. And I'm going to be speaking to Detective Chief Superintendent Andrew Gould of the Metropolitan Police Department in London and also of the National Police Chiefs Council. We are honored and thrilled to have, I'm just going to call you Andrew, even though it should be Detective Chief Superintendent, because we only have 25 minutes. Is that okay? With Andrew. And the National Cybercrime Program lead, which he serves of the National Police Chiefs Council, is a national coordination body for law enforcement in the United Kingdom and their representative body for British police officers. And Andrew specializes in cyber. He advises and supports police forces, regional organized crime units, National Crime Agency, during all types of major cybercrime incidents. He's got an extraordinary background of law enforcement and dedicated service that is just so impressive in terms of the number of people he's helped and the service he's done to the people in London. He set up something called Police Cyber Alarm that we're going to talk about, in a very innovative and extraordinary collaborative corporate and government program in the UK. There's nothing like it in the US. And to me, every once in a while, you encounter a law enforcement official who's very special, who's unique and a real trailblazer, and whose enthusiasm is infectious and whose dedication is just so admirable. And Andrew fits that bill, and it's just my honor to be with him today. So welcome, Andrew, from London. So glad you could be with us.
Well, thank you, John. Gosh, after an introduction like that, I think people are only going to be disappointed, but thank you. That's very kind.
Well, let's start out just briefly. What's your professional background and what do you do from day to day? And what's the National Police Chiefs Council?
Sure. So the Chiefs Council is basically the way we're organised in the UK. In England and Wales, we have 43 county police forces, which you can equate to what you've got in the States and America. Then you've got a national force in Scotland and the same in Northern Ireland. So the Chiefs Council is basically all the chiefs getting together to try and agree the strategy, the policy, the process, get us all working together in a bit more of a collaborative way rather than 43, 45 organisations trying to do the same thing and completely, pulling in a completely different direction. Doesn't work all the time, but generally it's pretty effective at getting us all pointing in the same direction.
Okay, so what are you seeing as the biggest threat right now? We just had a panel on ransomware. Has that changed? Is that something that's a big problem in the UK? It's a huge problem in the US. What are the biggest threats that you see?
It's huge here as well. You won't be surprised to hear. So ransomware for us, it's always been the number one cybercrime threat, but it seems like it's the threat from it and the impact particularly from it has really grown substantially this year. We've seen probably a trend over the last 12 months or longer to ransomware becoming more sophisticated, more capable in the way that it's able to do more things when it kind of lands on your system. And also being harder to detect, harder to remove, and just generally more disruptive and more impactful. But we've also seen at the same time, I think, a big spike in the number of organisations that are being hit, and organisations seem to be finding it much harder to tackle effectively.
Well, so what's your strategy for combating ransomware and other kinds of cyber attacks? What are you doing? Is there anything that you're doing that's different than what we're doing in the US?
I think there's a lot that we're doing that's similar. So I do a lot of work with the FBI, Secret Service and the NYPD. There's some really impressive law enforcement work going on in the US. But I think where we do have an advantage, and it's probably by the fact that there are just less police forces here, I think we're a lot more joined up, a lot more cohesive. So we've got the National Crime Agency, which is kind of our equivalent in some ways of the FBI. Then we've got 10 regions, we're sort of split into geographically, that have each got their own regional cybercrime unit. And then over the last couple of years, we've built local force cybercrime units. And we've got tasking, control and authority over all of those teams. So, we talk a bit cheesily about being Team Cyber UK, and it is a bit cheesy, but it is genuine. The quality of the working relationships we've developed with the National Cybersecurity Centre and GCHQ and the NCA and across the regions is second to none. So we move jobs around, we share different investigative actions. So, for example, if you're a big company that's hit by an incident, it will be quite common to see somebody from the National Cybersecurity Centre and the National Crime Agency or a region turn up to investigate alongside each other, to do the digital forensics work alongside each other, and share that product. So I think our advantage is the way we're able to kind of coordinate and work together. I think probably better than we've seen in any other country in the world so far. But I think in terms of the actual work that we're doing ourselves, we kind of focus very much in 4 areas. So we talk about the 4P strategy, copied from terrorism for us in the UK. So we're obviously focused on the pursuit aspect of apprehending and disrupting the criminals. Very protect focused in terms of cybercrime prevention messaging for business in the public. Prepare focused in terms of resilience planning and exercising. I think one area where we are doing more than we see in the States, we're very focused on prevention work. So that prevent bit, identifying young people and diverting them away from this pathway. We find a lot of young people engaging in cybercrime don't even realise what they're doing as a crime, certainly don't understand the impact that it can have on them and those that it affects. So by trying to get hold of them early and divert them away from the justice system, actually we can divert them into meaningful employment within the industry. And that's one of our big areas of focus. And we don't see a lot of other countries focusing on that in that way.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree with you. We have a question already. Curious to hear the view on the legality of making ransomware payments. Is it facilitating the underlying criminal behavior? Is it fueling money laundering and other criminal activities? Does law enforcement have a position or just look the other way? This is a tough one. Very tough for the U.S. The FBI generally answers this. They have a public view and a private view, I feel like. So what do you think?
Well, I'll be quite public. I think it's quite a nuanced, complex area. So I worked in terrorism for a long time before I came into cyber, and there it's very clear. You don't pay ransoms to terrorist groups. That's a criminal offence. It isn't a crime to pay ransomware in the UK. There are discussions around whether it should or shouldn't. My personal view is we shouldn't go down that road, because actually if you think about the disruptive impact of ransomware, you're only paying because you've got no other way of recovering and getting back to business as usual. So if you're going to criminalise the act that saves that business from going under and saves all those jobs and that employment, then that's got to be the right thing to do. So it is difficult. It is driving a business model. If we stop paying ransoms, then the criminals wouldn't be doing it. But an awful lot of good businesses would go under between now and that time. And we don't want that at any time, but particularly not the state of the world at the moment. The last thing we want to do is be making businesses' life harder than it already is.
Excellent. So that in the US, you have all sorts of issues, because if the threat actor is a terrorist or on the OFAC list or something like this, it throws a whole wrench into it. And that's what's happening right now. We have another question. And this goes to the cooperation question. This person asks, I'd be interested to know if law enforcement is also notified in case of a data breach by companies, or mainly GDPR relevant authorities get notified. And sort of goes to this issue. In the US, cooperating is not something that's viewed necessarily by attorneys as a good thing. Although, and I think it's a constant balance, but you will find some incident response lawyers here in the US who say, you know what, let's try to notify the FBI, but let's do it in a very light way. Let's notify a field agent who's not likely going to do anything, so we can do our own thing. So back to the question, do you think UK is notified, and do you encourage, obviously you encourage people, but do you worry that they're not notifying you because of the ramifications? Or is there anything you want to clear up about what happens when they notify you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's another really good question. So we have huge problems with underreporting in the UK. There's a real lack of confidence within business community to report to police, because to be perfectly honest, until a couple of years ago, actually UK policing wasn't interested in investigating cybercrime. It's quite happy with the position of people not reporting. So if you did, you were unlikely to get any kind of meaningful response. That's very, very different now. And actually, I think now you probably get quite a sympathetic and I would hope reasonably sophisticated response. So we do find, but it's hard, because if you're in the middle of a data breach or a ransomware attack, your priority is getting back to business as usual as quickly as possible. Now with GDPR, you've also got the pressure of informing a regulator. You just don't have the bandwidth to deal with anyone else or anything else within the middle of that crisis when you're at the eye of the storm. And I think we're actually really sympathetic to that. And what we've seen since GDPR came in is a real change in, often when people did report to law enforcement, you'd be dealing with a CISO. Now you're dealing with the lawyers, if you're dealing with anybody at all. So that that is a challenge. That is frustrating because our whole approach is about helping those organisations get back to business as usual first, and if they're able to support an investigation, that's fantastic. But I mean, for a lot of smaller organisations that can't afford all that legal advice, they don't know where to go, they don't know where to start, they don't know what their obligations are. So we do spend a lot of time helping with mitigation advice before we get anywhere near starting an investigation. But for the big players that are all using the incident response companies and kind of using them to mitigate the breach, identify what's happened, they all work to an evidential standard. So we can take their packages and whatever they've got at a later date. As long as people know what our requirements and needs are and are happy to meet that, it doesn't have to be met there and then in the middle of that crisis, as long as it's being preserved somewhere. But the best way of kind of managing that to kind of maximise the investigative opportunities to actually kind of identify and get hold of the individuals that have done it is have a plan in the first place. Come and talk to us about what that response might look like. There's no obligation when you get hit in the UK to report. So you can come and have whether you want to, I have many a Friday afternoon hypothetical conversation with a lawyer saying, if one of my clients were to come with this scenario, right, what would the response look like? And, we're happy to do that. You can come and have that conversation and you're not obliged to actually report the crime or support any kind of investigative operational activity. So we're just one of a number of tactical options that you can consider to use to deal with the incident. And there I can think of one quick example, one quick operational story is when I was running the Met Cybercrime unit before I moved into this role. We had a very, very large financial services company who reported it was a data breach and then the extortion demand. They came to us for help. We took over the online negotiation. We did some of the other stuff that we can do. And we identified and located the hackers in Paris. We had Met officers on the ground in Paris within 24 hours, working with the national French cybercrime unit. And within a week, we basically arrested the whole of the Rex Mundi hacking group, which is quite an interesting European hacking group at that time. Now, that doesn't happen every day all the time, but that is quite a regular occurrence. So there are opportunities there, but we can only take those opportunities if they're brought to us for assistance. If we don't know about it, we're never going to be able to do that.
So if somebody is notified, how does it work with the GDPR? If there's some GDPR notification made to whatever data protection authority there is, do you have access to that information, or do they notify you? Is there any bridge between the two?
We do talk regularly with the Information Commissioner's Office, but we don't share information with them. So we would say to anyone that comes to us, look, those are your obligations. Whether you choose to fulfill those obligations or not is a matter for you and the regulator. It's not a matter for us, and we won't share that information. And the ICO know that that's our position, and that's the legal position. Actually, even if we wanted to, by law, we wouldn't be allowed to. And they kind of take the same approach, and it sounds like we're quite not working together. We are, and we work well together, but we don't share individual information on individual organisations' breaches. Not without the agreement of that organisation.
Excellent. I wanted to ask, I have another question I'm going to get to in a second, but I also wanted to make sure I asked you about police alarm, because it really struck me when you told me about it, in that this is an information sharing program that's beyond anything that anyone's ever done in the US, where you literally attach a device essentially or set up an application at a company, and that company's logging information, and that company's maybe whatever indicators of compromise are immediately sent over to your office or to the various regional offices, the cyber resilience offices. And apparently, according to the releases, that you're careful to strip away any private information or anything that anybody be concerned about. So number one, I don't know how you got that through, because I don't know if that is even possible to do here in the US, but it sounds pretty amazing to me, because we're often sharing indicators of compromise and logging information with companies. So why not share that stuff first off? You just have to trust government that they're not taking information that they shouldn't. That's at least one risk. What are your thoughts on all of that? And has it been successful for you, this program?
Yeah, it's early days. So we've only kind of launched it publicly in the last month or so. So we're starting to get businesses to sign up. it's actually been a lot less controversially received than we expected. We were expecting a lot more challenge around it. We know what we're doing. So I'll step back and just explain very quickly how it works. So basically, you voluntarily, as an organisation, download the alarm software onto your external network. It's looking at firewall data, and it's only capturing suspicious activity. It's not capturing general activity. It's only the suspicious activity that your firewall rules are identifying as suspicious, plus indicators of compromise that we know from investigations or other partners, kind of like precursor reconnaissance activity, patterns of behavior that we know are suspicious. Obviously, we will capture that as well, because we'll be looking for that. But the idea being that the more organisations sign up, the more data we have, the better picture we have of the day-to-day threat in the UK, and then we're able to use that threat data to drive all our operational activity. So that will help us to identify UK-based threat actors, of which there are plenty. I mean, there is a view that, cybercrime is all very global and international, and we're just being attacked from overseas. And that, of course, there's a big element of that, and that's much harder to tackle. But in all our countries, there's a huge homegrown element as well. These tools are really easy to use. You don't have to be that technically sophisticated. Since our force teams have been in existence in the last 18 months, we're making hundreds of arrests a year now, whereas before it was only a handful. So there's plenty out there. You can have an impact. But we can also use that data to work with our partners to progress international investigations as well. But probably the biggest value of the data is understanding lifetime cybercrime threat data. So to have that clear understanding of how criminals are changing and working immediately, we're able to share that, and also in a really localized way with organizations. So if you're in Durham or Birmingham, the picture might be different to London, but you can actually sit and say, we've seen this volume and nature of attacks in the last week, 2 weeks. Right. Suddenly we have a lot more kind of credibility and value for organizations to want to come and have those conversations with us and share that. And the organizations get the individual benefit, not just of helping us for the bigger picture, but being more locally focused. That organization will do vulnerability assessment scanning monthly. So they'll get that assessment of where they're vulnerable. And we're not there yet, but probably in about 3 months, we will be able to do live automated alerts when we think they've been breached. So we'll be able to say, right, date, time, place, you need to look at this because that's particularly suspicious, which, we're not going to create a national SOC, obviously, but at least they'll be getting alerts for things that they wouldn't otherwise identify. So there's real value in signing up to be a member.
Yeah, I think it could also help you with liability in the sense that if you get charged in a class action after a data breach, which is a huge industry in this country right now, the number of class actions that are filed within 24 hours could number in the hundreds. Wow. Is to say, well, look, we're connected with the police. We're doing everything we possibly can to stay on top of this. So I like it for a lot of reasons. I worry about it like everybody else, but so long as it's responsibly carried out, I think it sounds terrific. Here's another question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this one. Do you think Brexit will impact on how you conduct cyber investigations and information across European investigation organizations? And if it's going to, what is your organization doing to prepare for these perceived impacts? These are some tough questions.
Yeah, they are. They're really good questions. So the honest answer is, I think we know. We think we know what will happen in terms of if suddenly there'll be no legal framework for us to share in the way that we have done in the past. But all our European law enforcement partners want to carry on sharing. And actually, if you look at the amount of data and intelligence and evidence that Europol hold, 40% of that has come from the UK. We're the biggest net contributors by a long, long way. So for them to not have access to what we bring is suddenly a really big loss. So ultimately, it's for the politicians to decide. We'll be able to continue to get the access, whether we're in or not in, but we won't be able to access it as quickly and in such an automated way as we do now. So we're expecting and hoping the kind of the side agreements to be done to mean we can pretty much carry on as business as usual. And then certainly our officers that are seconded all around Europe and within Europol, we expect them to say we're not bringing them back, and their host countries are happy with that. So we're hoping at the last minute people see sense. I think everyone understands the value of that cooperation. You just hope it doesn't fall foul of the politics. But there's no indication that it will, because it's in everybody's interest to continue.
Excellent. Here's another question. Do you deal with many cases of identity theft fraud? Do you even classify the cyber frauds in a different way? I think identity theft, it's hard to quantify, certainly here in the U.S. Do you think, is it growing? Is it getting worse? I think there's so many terrific ways to protect yourself against identity theft that seems like one of the cyber crimes that might be waning a little bit, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, there is no specific offence of identity theft in the UK. Okay. So it's not something. I mean, it's good evidence of precursor activity to show the actual fraud. So you would investigate it to help prove your offence, because it goes to show the mens rea, the mindset.
Right.
But there's no specific offence there. But that as a way of enabling more general fraud isn't the area of cybercrime that we work in. But yeah, clearly it's a significant issue.
Interesting. Here's another question. This comes from Dave Fontaine, who was the former CEO of Kroll, which is a big private investigations firm and cyber firm. Is the police technology commercial in nature, or was it built and is it maintained by the government? A government-managed sort of application service provider seems like a challenge, especially these days when it's hard to find good cyber people to hire. I mean, there's 3 million or so jobs that are vacant right now in the area of cybersecurity. Anybody listening and has kids, tell them to do cyber. They'll find a job very quickly. But what do you think about that? I was wondering that myself. How does that who developed that for you?
Yeah, no, it's another good question. And actually, incidentally, that's what I tell my kids as well. So we use depending on the area, we use a mixture of tools, a lot of private sector tools, kind of configured or altered for our purposes, or maybe some of the functionality we get that you maybe wouldn't get in the private sector, but generally largely the same. But also that there are some in-house particular tools that we might use. But then you do have the problems of that's often one or two very gifted innovators that build something, and then you've got to kind of maintain it, keep it current, keep it working, which is a challenge. So it's a mix and match. But I think certainly in terms of trends, we're moving away from, we've got to manage it or own it and hold it ourselves, to, we're starting to move to the cloud in quite a serious way in policing, which is long overdue. But suddenly that means we can start sharing data, evidence and intelligence across forces in a way that we've just never been able to do before. So there's some huge opportunities that policing is starting to work towards in the UK. One of the big things that we need is a national infrastructure, so we can share evidence, intelligence, case management, all that kind of good stuff. We just don't have anything like that. So all the benefits that business gets in terms of efficiencies and working together and working in an automated, smart and fast, digitally capably aware way, law enforcement in the UK and the US can't do that because we don't have the platforms, we don't have the technology, and governments haven't understood it and invested in it, quite frankly. But that's starting to change now. So I actually I'm really optimistic. There's some really positive stuff going on.
Interesting. You mentioned early on that you're dealing more with lawyers than CISOs, and then more than technologists. What do you think? What do you see as the most common failures of lawyers who were involved in a data breach response that you're dealing with? Mistakes that the lawyers make, other than maybe they're not being as fulsome as you would like. What do you see?
I think probably the biggest issue for us is just the outdated assumptions of how we work and what we can offer.
Right.
So they'll be giving the wrong advice to their clients because they don't understand how we work and what we could potentially do. So that can be. So we may never get anywhere near speaking to anyone in the company. And I think sometimes I might be being a little unkind, but I think sometimes when the lawyers realise that doesn't get fed back to the client because it makes them look bad. So that can be a challenge. But then if we do cooperate and work together, often that can be very successful. But sometimes it can be a frustration if the lawyer can become that single point of failure. If we're not allowed to have direct access to the client, right, to have some quite technically complicated questions because they want everything to be legally privileged. And I understand that kind of that desire to control and protect. That's the job. Not at all critical of that. But if they haven't got the skills to do it and it becomes a blocker, that becomes a real problem because it slows everything down, which is frustrating. But more importantly, things get lost in translation and then opportunities get missed.
Yeah. Is there a solution? The lawyers want to be there. They have to read all sorts of, they're very concerned about work product and attorney-client privilege. Is there any solution that you know of to that? Maybe to just make it about the facts, or to figure out a way that the communication can be made so that there isn't such a stifling of it or so much tension?
I think I'm not sure how you do this, but I think the answer is the same in any business or personal relationship. It's got to be based on trust. And so how do you build trust? But the same as you do anywhere else. You need to work together in that time of peace to understand how you can work together best in that time of war. And that it's really hard to create the time to do that. But events like this, or kind of bringing law enforcement together with lawyers from different law firms to just kind of tabletop this stuff, talk through how we work, and so we can understand better their issues and concerns, because we're not lawyers. There'll be things that we won't have considered that will be really important to them.
Sure.
That we're just, police officers, like everybody else, or can be particularly bad at being very tunnel visioned. We want or need what we want or need, and it's all about the evidence. And that's not always a good approach. That's not a great way of taking people with. And we're kind of used to being able to tell people what to do as well. And that's not the right approach, nor do we have the power to do that in this area. So I think there's learning on both sides, but anything we can do to bring the two sides together more regularly just builds that trust and confidence to kind of dip your toe in the water and try it in that time of war. Because in the UK,
go ahead.
Sorry, go on. I was going to say in the UK, you can come and have a hypothetical or genuine conversation about a client, and there's no obligation to then actually report it or follow through on that. So you can have that kind of, what would it look like? What are the options? And we can talk through the options, and the client can take it or leave it without prejudice. And that's probably what a lot of people don't realise or understand.
Right. No, I see that, and I think there's certainly some lawyers who are very good in this country at sort of anonymizing things so that they can still report. The FBI will actually participate in a tabletop exercise with a company as sort of part of their outreach. Do you guys do that as well? Does your team do that?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. It's really valuable. It's time very well spent.
And how do you even train your?
Hey.
Oh, is that Bruce? Oh,
hey, I'm sorry. I thought you saw me. Yeah, we got to cut it off.
No, I'm sorry. You're not allowed to. I'm just kidding.
Let me find the electrical cord here.
Right. This has been great. Andrew, just fantastic. Thanks for making yourself available. It's such a privilege for all of us to have the opportunity to hear from you, and great questions from everyone in the room. So just fantastic. And keep doing the great work. We thank you for your tremendous service to everyone, not just in the UK. And we couldn't appreciate you more.
Thank you very much. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Terrific insights from a really interesting perspective, and we really greatly appreciate. We're honored that you were able to join us. And John, terrific job. We are up next with our cybercrime and financial services panel. That'll be at 4:10 BST. I hope everybody will stick around and join us in just about 7 or 8 minutes. Thank you.